Hey, what's up, man? We are back here in the palatial estates of my partner in law enforcement, Bill Cannon, for part 2 with retired Lieutenant Jimmy Molloy. And before we came back on the air, Bill started he was giving me a note that I should ask you about this story. Maybe you wanted to save it for later on, but I'm fascinated by that because so far what we've learned from you is that you're squared away. You're a martial artist, okay?
That's a nice car.
Right, he's got the bullet. He's got the leather jacket to go with it. He rides motorcycles. But that you were also squared away on the job, right?
Yeah.
And a great boss to have you
need a boss, right?
You need a boss. But now Bill was telling me that there was a time where the job was actually after you for some reason.
Yeah, well,
when I say after you, I mean that you might have stepped on your dick. And for the civilians, what that means is something happened where you got the spotlight on you, and you had to, even though you were this great boss, for some reason the job was coming after you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't specifically the job itself. It was maybe one chief in the job that was in a position of power. So I was in a 2-4 for 4 years, from 2004, 5 to 2009. Are we
talking about when you were a cop or when you were
I'm a squad commander, detective squad commander. So I went from the 2-4 to the 19th. And how I got to the 19th is the chief at the time of Manhattan Detectives asked me. I've been in the 2-4 for 4 years. You know, we were having some success in the squad. And
just so people know, there is a lot of movement as far as bosses in the squad, right?
Absolutely.
So if you have a problem with a boss in a detective squad, they always say, relax, they'll be gone soon.
Right. They move around. So I was in the 2-4 for 4 years, and it was the 19th is, in as far as Manhattan North goes, it's very, I don't want to say prestigious, but it's very politically oriented because it is the Upper East Side. There's a lot of consulates there, international people. So things that happen.
What does the 19th cover so far as the people 19th, that don't live in the city?
Yeah, it covers from like 59th Street up to 96th Street and from the park to the river.
Okay, from Central Park east, right?
Yep. And then from
to the water.
To 96th Street and then down to like 59th Street.
So that's a very expensive neighborhood to live in.
Absolutely. So, and there's a lot of wealth there. They say like the zip code, 10021 is like one of the wealthiest ones on the planet.
City, yeah,
on the planet. So
right.
There's a lot of influence there. So cases that happen there, it's like Central Park, it's the windows of the world, the eyes of the world are on it. It gets a lot of high profile interest. You might have it could be, it doesn't even have to be a homicide. You have a homicide in the 19th, it's going to get a lot of attention. You might have a homicide in other commands that work, like the 2-4, the 7th, or the 9th.
Well, doesn't Jim just the city always will say, they'll say a homicide is treated the same way everywhere, and that's total nonsense. If there's a homicide in the 19th, there's like 50 detectives working on it right away, right?
Right. Yeah. So what happened in 2009? I was asked by the chief then of Manhattan, "Hey, would you like to go over to the 19th? It's it's a prestigious." He thought it was like a step up, and I'm like, "Well, to be honest with you, Chief, I'm kind of comfortable here in the 2-4. I know the perps. I'm very familiar with everybody. It's humming really well." He's like, "Oh, okay, great."
But when a chief asks you a question like that, is he really asking you? Or is he basically telling you, "I want to move you to the 19th"?
Well, that's what happened, and I said, "Listen, Chief, I'll go wherever you need." And he said, "But if you're asking me, I'd like to stay where I'm at." He said, "Hey, no problem, Jimmy, I got it." A week later, I was transferred to the 19th. No problem. I knew that was coming, so I went. And at the time, they were having some issues with the command structure over there. There was a couple of sergeants. Sergeant was running the squad for a while. It wasn't working out, I guess. So. The head lieutenant that had been there had left and went to another unit. He may even have retired and then eventually came back. So it was.
So they're sending you over to clean it up.
I guess that was the implication. I went
That's
there.
That's never a good thing for the boss when he gets there and his job is to clean it up because you're gonna have to straighten some stuff out.
Well, it was a busy squad for amount of caseload. Like they do over 4,000 cases a year.
Like grand larcenies and stuff.
Well, mostly grand larcenies and burglaries were the big things over there. A lot of burglaries on the Upper East Side and a lot of grand larcenies. And it had its share of robberies. It bordered the 2-3 at 96th Street, and you had some issues over there.
A lot of bars, a lot of good restaurants,
tons of bars,
lots of that. And then like I said, now something, and you would get that call. The call would come in from 1PP. Hey, take a look at this. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. It could be an aggravated harassment. It could be something else. You send the detectives over to take 61s on because somebody's calling somebody that knew somebody. So that was part of it. So there was a little adjustment period I realized that going in, but it took some time, and I was able to navigate it. And the whole bureau, the whole department is run on the CompStat basis. And CompStat, I don't know if you guys have ever talked about that. It's just basically
we've talked about it a lot.
How the job has changed, and as a squad commander and a precinct commander, you're really under the gun of CompStat. Everything goes by it. The job runs by it. So those kind of complaints that come in as 61s, and you really have to stay on top of what is going on within that squad. So what happened at that point, I got to the 19th, and I was adjusting pretty well. That was in 2009. So the case that Bill was referring to was a grand larceny of a wealthy socialite on the Upper East Side. And she had some jewelry in a safe in her apartment, and it had gone missing. And she made a report in.
Was she on Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue?
Yeah, the exact address. It was like it was one of these.
They're all high end.
Yeah,
Fifth
high end,
Avenue,
72nd Street.
Avenue,
It was very very wealthy
East
people.
End Avenue.
Yeah, the husband was a very prominent lawyer. He had argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. He was on the board of the New York Times, so he had, there was some influence there. And they traveled in those circles. But, we took a 61. The detectives did a case on it. You have your 12 investigative steps, those things that were laid out there to beat you down. And you really had to certain cases.
You're talking about Pulaski's?
Yeah,
12,
well, yeah.
Well, that was actually
exactly.
Resnick invented that, I think.
Well, yeah, and Pulaski picked up on it and really ran it out there. So what would happen on this particular case, it was a grand larceny, and like I said, because CompStat drives the world, and in this world of the 19th, you'd have 4,000, 4,500 cases with, 15 detectives. There's no way you're going to drill down on every case and do 30 DD5s on every case. So you had to pick and choose what you're going to investigate. And that was the decision that I had made. And that at a CompStat process, when you go and you're standing at that podium.
They all get investigated, but who are you going to spend some time
without a doubt. Like, you got to pick the low-hanging fruit, and then the ones that, listen, this one isn't going anywhere. Okay, we're going to close that out, move on to the next one that we can do. Because you'd be at that focus at the podium at CompStat very adversarially, and they'd be like, hey, listen, they'd be telling you that. You can't work every case to this. You got to pick the ones you're going to work, and your responsibility is to get to the end of it.
To know which ones to pick.
Right. So as a squad commander, I put that out there. Okay, these are the kind of cases we were going to go with. So this was a grand larceny with jewelry missing from a safe. So the detective that catches the case, this guy, Detective Hicks, good guy, solid worker, catches the case, goes out, does the interview like he's supposed to, gets pictures of the jewelry, puts out a little wanted poster, does his pawn shop canvases. But one of the key factors of it is, the jewelry's in the safe. It's not closed all the time. She has women over, her friends come over for, tea and cards, and, they have the maid come in and different people in and out of the apartment. So they wouldn't give us, this detective, her friends' names. She didn't want her friends interviewed. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we can't interview everybody could have access to it. You're kind of shutting a door on us. So they basically referred us to the doorman, whoever came in and signed in for the day, kind of thing. So they were cooperating, but
whoever got called upstairs.
Yeah, whatever. So, but we couldn't talk to everybody. So we put it out there. We did our pawn shop canvases. Couldn't find, the jewelry wasn't there.
Is there any chance she lost this jewelry?
It's very possible. One of the interviews was they weren't sure initially if it was, at this location or maybe their home, their vacation home, which they checked, and it wasn't there either. So, she's paid off, it's an insurance claim, but it's not the reason. I'm not implying she did this for insurance. She got it, she got reimbursed by the insurance.
They didn't need the money.
But at the end of the day, it's 4,000 cases. Cases goes through the process. It's signed off on.
But
it's
you
closed.
Did more on that case than
it's
I would have
closed,
done.
man. It's C4. Leads exhausted. We're out. We couldn't interview everybody. Okay, we're done. So the case, that's in early 2010, right? That's like January 2010. So it's the end of the year now. It's December. She's at some Christmas party, this woman. And of course, because there's a circle she runs in, Ray Kelly's there. And she approaches Ray Kelly, who she knows, and says, oh, hey, I got robbed. And, oh, really? Well, how'd you get robbed? Well, tell me your story. So he makes a call to the chief of detectives at the time. And the chief of detectives is, Detective, Chief Pulaski at the time. So he makes an inquiry. And when he inquires, he's very detailed on his inquiry. I get a call about the case, of course, and then I get a visit from, he gets assigned to an inspections unit, comes out, inspections takes the case. My guys everything we do is redone. And you can imagine the swell of attention it's getting now, because even from the borough level, everybody's like, hey, what's going on with this case? And I'm like, listen, it's a C4, man. It was a C4, 8 months ago. Mm-hmm. We went through it, and I was confident and comfortable with the way the case went. And whenever I was called on it, professionally went through everything in detail. Said, this is what we did. This is where it's at. But of course now, it was, did you contact, the New York State Geological Association to see if the Julie was broken down? We're like, no, of course we didn't do that. But that was a step that, you got to do that. So there were all these things brought in that we had to do at the time. So again, this went on for several months of this whole thing going on.
But they basically also put your life through hell, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
People
because
don't understand when they send chief of detectives inspections unit. First of all, those guys couldn't find the bad guy in Rikers Island.
But they're coming now. They're pulling
over
the case.
your case.
My case, my memo book. As a lieutenant, you have to carry, still keep a memo book. So they're going over my memo book entries.
And one of the things with these cases is just because they're coming in to look at that thing, they can't leave empty-handed.
Right.
So even if they're not finding anything wrong with this case, who didn't sign out at what time?
Right, now they want to.
Who said it's okay for this guy to have a day off? And why is this
White Sox syndrome?
It's
so meanwhile,
a big pain in the ass.
So meanwhile, we're running a case. We're still catching our 4,000 cases a year, our grand larcenies. We're going to CompStat, and then they created at that time grand larceny stat because CompStat was so effective. They started having a separate CompStat just for grand larceny cases. So you were subject to CompStat, grand larceny stat. So we're going through that, and I established a very good protocol on how I handle cases. And as I mentioned before, if a case came in, I would never say, and not to badmouth my colleagues at all, but I would never say, hey, that detective, he should have done this, he should have done that. I wouldn't do that. Like this would be the case.
I've seen bosses do that.
Throw a guy under the bus.
That's quite admirable.
I would never do that. And
because they don't let the detectives come up there and speak.
No, they would never. And
So
that's
the
not
boss
going to
has
save
to
you
speak
anyway.
on their
And it's never
behalf.
going to save you anyway if you did it. So, but you want to defend yourself, and it's such an adversarial position. It gets to some people sometimes, and they want to fight back. And
It's like you're the coach of a team.
right. So I developed a strategy when I did that. I learned how to do it. It took a while. I did it for 10 years. So I was going to CompStat for 10 years. So I learned how to listen. Here's a case. I knew what they were pulling, why they're looking at it. You knew what the deficiencies were on it because any case can have a deficiency. But I'd look at it, and I would never let them steamroll me at CompStat. I wouldn't fight them, but I wouldn't roll over and go, oh, yeah, we should have done this. I'd say, yeah, this isn't done right. But I would look at similar cases that we did do exactly the right thing. So they would come at me hard.
Like a lawyer.
And I'd say, okay, all right, you're right. We didn't do it here. But here's 5 cases we did the exact same thing on. So it was a bang, bang. And then they'd come again, and I'd have another answer, bang, bang. And then they'd come again, and I'd let it go. So I'd let them know that, listen, I do know what we're doing here, but I'm not going to fight you. You got your point across. I got mine. And that over 10 years developed a good reputation amongst the various DCOs and chiefs that were there, because in my reign as a squad commander, there were a lot of DCOs. I think there were 5 different deputy commissioner operations.
Do people crumble in CompStat like bosses?
Yeah.
It can happen.
Definitely.
So that's the process you're under. And this case now is a grand larceny. So I had made a decision earlier about, again, I had 3 supervisors, I have 15 detectives, and I'm going to, this is how we're going to handle grand larceny cases because I'm answering them up. And this case is something that is handled exactly the way I wanted it handled. It was closed out. Not that they weren't cooperative, but we ran out of where we were going to go with this. But once it got that attention, it brought a spotlight on it again. You should have done this, and they went through all these investigative things that we should have done.
The geological thing?
That was just one that I thought was kind of comical, and we had to do it. So after all this is said and done, it's getting ratcheted up now. I'm getting calls from the chief of department's office. The number 2 in charge of the chief of detectives is calling me up. The lieutenant running chief of Ds is calling me every day for an update on the case. I end up getting GO15 over it. So I got to get a lawyer from the Lieutenants Association. I get called down to the chief of D's inspections office.
What do they think? You're holding something back?
I get GO15. My sergeant, who obviously initially reviewed, because he signed one of the DD5s on the case, he got pulled down, and the detective.
Are they insinuating that you committed some type of crime so that you weren't investigating this properly?
Improper investigation. That's
right,
what they're implying.
But all the steps were there originally. Any new steps that they told you to do, you did. So what's the problem?
So again, I don't know the underlying reasoning other than it was this initial contact with this woman, with the police commissioner who made the call to the chief of detectives, who now launched this investigation basically into it. So when the detective is interviewed, and then sergeant, they weren't interviewed about what they did. They were interviewed about me. Basically, they were questioning them to say,
he was the target. They wanted a piece of his ass.
Right.
Yeah.
Why, though?
Because they sent them, I guess he wanted to go back perhaps to the police commissioner and say, oh, I found these deficiencies in this squad commander, and this is what we're doing.
And this is
I don't know.
the chief of detectives unit that went over there. Those are the people?
Inspections,
Inspections.
yeah.
So inspections is going through the whole case. And this is going on for like over a month now. This is going on again. So after I'm GO15 and I'm brought in there, the first thing they do in the GO15, you know, I'm good at answering questions, and I knew the case very well. But the first thing they had me read was from like a 1973 detective manual that said the squad commander will review every case. That's the first thing they had me read into the record after, you know, reading me my rights. Right.
Mofos,
and as I said, there's 4,000 cases in the 19th, and with the new DD5 system, they can see if that case was ever reviewed. And of course, this is a case I didn't review. It was signed, you know, went through the process. I review cases. We all whack up what you review. And
you're the squad boss.
So they got me. The first thing open GO15, it was a gotcha. You never reviewed this case from 1973.
So after your sergeant closes the case out, you were supposed to go and read it over.
Well, because that's what that manual said, that the squad commanders could review every
was
case.
Was that 1973 thing still in effect?
It was.
Did they blow the dust off it or what?
Well, they were. He was in the process of rewriting, as you know, with all the chief of detectives manual, the detective bureau manual. But that's what they opened up the GO15. So it was the quick, okay, we got you. You never reviewed this case. I'm like, that's fine. So I went through the whole process. Then they're questioning me about it. And I guess they felt later on, I had heard that they felt I was a little indignant. And I wasn't. I was very professional in my responses, but I was cutting to the chase. I'm like, this case is a C4. It's a grand larceny. This is why they did it. They follow my protocols because at ComStat, I'm questioning about the enormous amount of cases we have and how are you cutting through what you're doing to handle the ones that we can make, you know, have an effective.
You're making sense out of this.
Right. So I went through that and I quoted the ComStats and things that I did.
Were any of these guys in inspections ever squad commanders?
No.
Yeah, so they're little bitch boys that work for the chief of D's that couldn't find a bad guy in Rikers Island, and they're going after one of the best squad commanders in the city, and they don't even know the questions to ask you.
Right. And then at the
and they know they have to come up with something.
Yes.
And at the very end, one of the last questions, and I found later, I was told, I don't know if it's true, I was told by someone that what they found very indignant, because when the chief of detectives and they listened to the GO15 tape, my response was, they said, well, Lieutenant, you know, is there anything else that should have been done on this case? And I said, well, this case was handled by Detective Hicks, you know, 8 months ago, and it was closed C4, you know, following protocols that, you know, I established that I thought would be, you know, proper investigation. And now after it was reopened, I counted, I think, 12 people that I was aware of that was involved with the case after the reinvestigation, and it's still a C4. Mm-hmm. And that's how I left it. They didn't like that.
And I'm like, that answer.
But that's what it was. Even after they all looked at it, it was still the C4.
But Jim, let me just get the other politics. Didn't the chief of detectives order a chief to give you charges and specifications over this?
Well, that followed after that. So what happened after, again, now that comes to May, and I find out later on that I'm going up to ComStat again. Now it's ComStat cycle. My command's up. I'm presenting. I find out the night before, I get a phone call from a sergeant who works with the chief of department. And he says to me, he goes, listen, they want to come after you tomorrow. He wants to, you know, the chief wants to come after you tomorrow and embarrass you because they're going to transfer you. So that was like the reason. They were going to say I had a bad ComStat and I was getting transferred. But apparently at that time, Esposito decided, no, you're not going to do that. You know, basically the chief, you're not going to do it. Again, this is third hand. I don't know if this conversation ever happened, but I do believe the guy who worked there. And I went to ComStat, I presented, and it was a normal ComStat. And then the next day, I get a call from somebody I knew in personnel that saw a transfer order come down, like, hey, you're getting transferred to the 7th Squad. I said, no. He goes, I didn't see it come in. I just see it coming out. How's it? Usually it comes through the front door. They walked it through to be transferred to the 7th Squad. And as I found out later, when I went down to the 7th Squad, the borough commander, not the borough commander, the
Detective Borough Commander.
Detective Borough Commander, Emery Connell, she reached out to me and said, listen, they told me to give you an interim evaluation and, you know, rate you really poorly on it. And she refused to do it.
You know, something, I had heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, she was really stand-up.
No, absolutely.
Emery O'Connell. Actually, I heard the chief of detectives ordered her to do it, and she said, as long as I'm commanding officer of Manhattan North Detective Operations, no one will give Lieutenant Molloy a below-standard evaluation. As long as I'm commander.
Right.
And I heard Pulaski kept repeating, our decisions have career ramifications. Right. And she just kept repeating, as long as I'm commander. And she was great. I thought that was fantastic.
No, and then
that other little weasel, the chief of Manhattan Detectives, He's still a chief in the Bronx now. I don't know if you want to mention his name.
Yeah, another chief unknown. Yeah, that was involved. He was the
still a weasel.
The second in command of the detective bureau. But then I got to the 7th precinct, and again I got transferred down to the 7th. I guess they felt, it was farther south or whatever. I didn't mind. I wasn't disgruntled about it. I didn't want to leave the 19th. I kind of liked it there. I got used to the detectives. It was starting to work. And I got to the 7th, and I met, Ronnie Haas was the commanding officer of Manhattan South Detective Operations. And he came down, very good guy. He had worked in Manhattan North as a captain, so I knew him years earlier, obviously responding to jobs and whatnot. So I had a good working relationship with him because he respected the type of work I did. And he came down and he said the same thing to me. He goes, listen, I was told, give you an interim evaluation. He goes, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it. I just want you to know that. So it meant a lot to me. That,
that's great.
That they stood up for it.
Just let me also bring something up, and I know you well. We work together. During the time this is going on, Jim has some personal problems. You're going through a divorce, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about like the department ripping you to shreds while you're very vulnerable. Look, with the suicide problem and all that stuff, they're ripping one of the best squad commanders to shreds over some bullshit.
I think that's a huge problem. What's funny is that you get these bosses that are doing really well in the command, and because they're doing such a great job there, they decide to move them to a troubled area or to fix something up somewhere else, and then they put them there. And you're the second boss that I used to work for a really great Sergeant Pat Montagno. I don't know.
Oh yeah, Pat,
yeah.
Great guy.
And he was our boss in the 2-6. Everybody loved him. And then all of a sudden, he went somewhere else, and then the Comstat didn't work out. And then he had to go somewhere else and do night watch because it was punishment for wherever he went after that because he was doing such a great job in the 2-6. I never understood that shit. It's just the politics.
You can't be a winner with Comstat if they want a piece of you. And the other thing was,
it's going to happen eventually.
Jim was a great squad commander. And because they soiled his name became like, oh, no, that guy's trouble, Meanwhile, he was everything you wanted in the squad commander.
But what happened after I got to the 7th, and there was 2 sergeants in the 7th, there wasn't a lieutenant there, and I fit in very well with it. And I didn't get disgruntled. I didn't want to leave the 19th, but I didn't want to let it beat me down. So many people in my position, 10 years as a squad commander, 77 detective squads. I really only know of 1, maybe 2 that left on their own terms. Of course, I had my 20 in at that point. I could have retired and said, fuck this, I'm leaving. But I didn't. I really liked to work. I liked working those cases sometimes,
It's almost like you got to get beat up a little bit along the way. And then this way, when you get to a position of your own power, then you get to do a little beating up. It's like a game that they play.
Well, also, if you don't have a rabbi that outranks the guy who's beating you down. Like if you knew someone that was above Pulaski, they could have said, back off. He's a friend of mine. And he would have backed off.
But you know what? Like I said, I survived it on a job. I didn't want to let it beat me. I thought about retiring. Then I said, well, I'm not going to let them run me out. But then I look back over the years. I stayed another 5 years after that, So, and I stayed as a squad commander, still doing CompStat and GangStat and Grand Larceny Stat and doing it, for a long time. And not that I like CompStat. I didn't like CompStat.
People don't realize the stress of that either.
No,
but it's so stressful.
Like I said, the formula that I figured out and I learned from a great squad commander. And when I took over the 2-4, this guy John Frawley was a sergeant running the squad.
I remember.
And great boss. And and he knew his stuff. He still knows his stuff, but he knew his stuff. And I thought, I go there as a lieutenant. Yeah, it might be a problem. He's been running the squad for a year. Hey, as a lieutenant's coming in, I had a cup of coffee and a rip. I haven't been in the squad in a long time, but I wanted to do the work. But we got along really well, and I learned a lot from him. And then it just took off. Great relationship.
It's nice that you give him credit.
Oh, without a doubt. Really nice. Absolutely. Great guy. And then he ended up going from there. He went to Warrants and then JTTF. That's the kind of guy he was, man. He was phenomenal. And now, he retired as well. But again, I went to the 7th now. And a whole nother world. Nobody cared what happened in the 7th. The 7th precinct is right under the Williamsburg Bridge, Lower East Side. Projects.
That's where Joe Murray was.
Right. So you got,
they sent him.
Houston Street between the 7th and 9th. That's like the Mason-Dixon line. You have the Campos houses in the 9th and the Wold houses in the 7th. And that's where all the problems were. A lot of shootings.
Did you drink under the bridge with Joe Murray?
With the local community.
I do have a funny bridge story though. Like one day I'm in the squad in the 7th with one detective. It's me and one detective. One guy's got court, the other guy's in 6. So there's like a lieutenant and a detective. That's it. That's the squad, right? Yeah. So we're upstairs. We're riding around in the morning. We come back with a sandwich. We're having something to eat in a little lounge area. And it's just about to bite in our sandwich. And the guy comes up, uniform from downstairs, and goes, "Oh, we got a jumper." Off the Williamsburg Bridge. Okay. So we walk out. We don't get in the car. We got to walk under the bridge. It's like a half a block down the street. And as we're walking up, I'm walking with Detective Rob. He stops dead in his tracks as we walk up to the jumper with this car. He's like, fuck. That's my car. It was his car, man. He had just bought this brand new like Toyota pickup truck, and the jumper went off and landed on his fucking car, man.
Shit.
Do you know what? It was his car. Only in New York, right? You're a detective.
Shit.
They jump.
Only in New York would you give advice to the other guys in the squad. Don't park underneath the bridge because when they jump off, they're gonna land on
You
your
know,
car.
and the funny part, but not funny for him, he had to go through his own insurance, uninsured motorist to get his car fixed. His car's out of service for a while.
Oh, God.
How
He caught the
funny is
case,
that?
you know.
Where else could you go that somebody would tell you a bit of advice that don't park underneath the bridge? Why? Bird shit? No. They jump off the bridge and land on your car.
Yeah, unbelievable.
That's crazy.
Seven
You
squad
can't
story.
make this stuff up.
Right.
And it's amazing how
Did you
like
go to the 9th too?
Yeah, and that was and
like
that,
if you
no,
were
I'll
a
tell you how I
busy
got to
boss
that.
in the
Yeah.
19th. You had 4,000 cases.
Right.
Now they're putting you in the 7th for punishment when nothing goes on, and you can read the paper and have a cup of coffee like a gentleman now every day.
Well, not really, because when I got there, my nickname by the squad guys, this guy Gillespie started a name, great detective. He started calling me Dexter, because I got there when the first month I was there were like 3 homicides and 4 shootings. They go, Lou, you come down here, you lighten up all the perps on us? I'm like, no, but it got busy, so it was great. That was my indoctrination to the 7th. It was very busy for a few months. And I was like, this is great. But you didn't have the oversight because nobody gave a shit.
No one cared.
It was like, I'd be expecting 30 calls and like, what?
Nobody's
Nothing.
calling you up to
called the
ask you
wheel,
about-
you sent it down to the chief
not
of
the
these.
19th.
about
and nobody
jewelry
cared,
that they're
man.
not even sure where they left it with a safe that was
Yeah,
open
no, it
and,
was-
and people walking in and out of that room all day every day.
Hey, we had another great case here. If I could talk about the 7th. Like those detectives, fabulous, good teams. A lot of animosity. I don't say animosity, but a lot of competition between the teams, which was great. And there was one detective, this guy. I don't want to name him, but everybody that I talk about, I know who I'm talking about. Just a great character. Just tried the hardest, but just wasn't that sharp as pencil out there. But he tried, man. He got out there. And one night, one of the detectives is going on a canvas for a grand larceny case. There's a credit card used all over places. At McDonald's, a credit card used. So he gets the video, and he's looking at the video, and he's like, getting the perp use the video. McDonald's has like 3 registers, So late at night, there's only one open, right? And there's a lot of people. They have to drink and they're all waiting in line to get their Mickey D's, So the detective's getting the video, and he sees.
Is that the one on Houston?
I'm not sure exactly
corner?
which one
All
it was. I don't really remember the exact one, but there's 3 registers. So there's a line of people, and then there's this one guy standing at the fucking register that there's nobody on for like 10 minutes as he's getting the video. Now he's getting the video because he recognizes the guy. It's this other detective. It's on his turnaround. He went out for a couple pops and he went to get something to eat. He's waiting online at the register. There ain't nobody at. For like 10 minutes of video, man. So the guy downloads the video. He starts making posters. He's like, here he is. He's hanging out.
It's the detective.
He had a couple of cocktails and he was waiting online for nobody to serve him. He didn't realize it because he was a little juiced up. But that was real fun. It was a good time.
Detective couldn't even figure out that register wasn't working.
Right.
It sounds like a Detective Pat story.
Yeah.
I knew that area. There used to be a comedy club over there, the Laugh Lounge, and I used to perform there all the time. And then there was a McDonald's on that corner that was pretty busy. But that's interesting, man. How they dump you in a house where it's going to be, it's actually going to be better for you.
It did work out. Made some, again, same way I managed a squad the same way I did everywhere else, and I got along with my guys. I was never the guy going out drinking on the weekends with guys or you play favorites. I kept everything fair. If I had an issue with a detective, we pull aside and I try to work it out. You don't have to like me. I don't like you, but we got to get the work done, man. So I would air it out. I was kind of a fixer that way. Every year I take the guys out, the whole squad, whether it's a holiday dinner. When I was in the 2-4, I used to get tickets to the Yankee Met games. I'd buy them for the whole squad. We go out for the afternoon, take the day off after borough covers. Just once in a while, do things like that to let the guys blow off the steam. And, and the 7th, I landed there, and it was just so busy. It was a great transition. And, we had one other case, and it was I like to bring it up because it touches upon the gallows humor you have to have, where other people really wouldn't understand the things that you guys were referring to before. And it was a homicide case, and it dealt with the housing project in the 9th and the 7th at Mason-Dixon line of Houston Street. And you almost want to feel bad for the guys involved, because what happened is one guy's brother from the 7th, the 7th guys from Wall go up into the 9th. They do a robbery of like this 14-year-old kid. They rob his jacket, and they go back to the 7th. So the kid goes home, tells his brother, hey, man, they robbed my jacket. And he knew the guys that robbed them. They lived down in the walled houses. So he his brother gets a couple of his buddies together. Let's go get that jacket back, man. They robbed my little brother's jacket. So one of the guys says, I'll bring the gun. Okay, you bring the gun, man. So the youngest of the 4 guys, you're going to carry the gun in case we get stopped. You're carrying the fucking gun. So they come down to the 7th, and they're looking for the guys, and they find them in a pizza shop. Now the guys clear out of the pizza shop, and we get video out in front of the street. It wasn't really clear video, but you could see it's like 2 flocks of birds with like 6 kids from the 7th, and then the 4 guys that came down from the 9th, and they're in the middle of the street, and they're going at it. And there's a little old man comes walking by, and he's using a cane. And then one of the guys from the 7th, who are like in the defensive mode, grabs the cane from the old man, starts swinging it in the air like this. And we find out later, he's yelling, come on, motherfuckers. He's yelling, let's go. So the older guy asked the young guy, hey.
Which team did the old man join?
He didn't join anybody's team. He's just walking by. They just took his cane. So the kid takes out the gun, hands it to the leader of the older crew from the 9th, and he takes that. It's a revolver, and he's pointing it, and he goes click, click. And as we find out later in interviews, the guy's waving the cane. He's yelling, "Come on, your gun's got nothing. They got blanks. They got blanks." Click, click, bang! And now they all scatter and run. They all run into a little deli, and there's video, crystal clear video. All the 6 guys are in the video, and they're all hanging out. And all of a sudden, the guy with the cane collapses. Turns out he was shot, and it pierced like his aortic artery.
They killed the old guy?
No, the old guy's outside. The guy waving the cane gets shot, and they're all running now because they hear a shot, and they're all hiding. Now they're inside looking out. Where are the guys with the gun? And one of the guys collapsed, and it turns out he was shot in the chest, and it pierced his aortic valve, and he bled out. But the adrenaline, he ran in, like a deer in the woods running. He ran in and he collapsed. We have the video. Now the door swings open, and the old man comes in, pushes his way in, grabs the cane, peels it up, and then walks out.
Wow.
So the whole squad was like, whoa, like that's justice. The guy got his cane back.
Case closed.
Yeah. So
it was a grand larceny.
We get the guys identified, and unfortunately, the guys who got shot were robbers. But the family of the kid who now the older brother did the shooting, they didn't want to make a report for robbery. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want the guy charged with robbery. I'm like, listen, your son's going to get charged with murder.
Yeah.
So it turns out the younger son who brought the gun, he turns himself in with his uncle because now we got the warrant squad. Everybody, we're hitting all locations. They're all known perps. We're hitting everywhere trying to get people. And the uncle turns him in, and he gives up the story, to...
How old was he?
He was, I think, 15. So he was there with his uncle, and he was interviewed, and he gives up the story. And it turns out, he's telling the detective, like, okay, now I told you, when can I go home? And he's like, in about 25 years, man.
Oh, shit.
You're involved in a murder here, man. You don't realize you just brought a gun to rob a guy, So, like I said, it's those kind of cases that nothing good comes out of it. And the guys who went down, they were, theoretically trying to do the right thing, trying to get his brother's jacket back.
Did they get charged with murder or manslaughter or what?
No, they initially, the guy turned in, he was cooperating, so he was charged with murder, but they were going to roll it back. Because he didn't technically fire the gun. Right. Technically, it's felony murder still, but he...
it's acting in concert.
Right. But the older brother fled, man. He left. He was gone. He went up to, like, Connecticut. Lawrence was, like, on a hunt for that guy for quite some time up in Connecticut. But again, the serious case, but the dark humor, that you got to laugh at stuff like that.
Man. His cane back.
Yeah, the old man got his cane back, man, and that was positive.
Was catching the larcenies in that squad.
Yeah, but no phone calls on that one, closed. Man. That was all done. 49's done. Nobody was calling on that one. That was
no one gave a shit about that.
You mentioned when we first started that you do a lot of work with POPPA, and I wanted to make sure that we get that in.
Sure.
Can you explain to our audience what POPPA is?
POPPA is it's an acronym. It's an organization that's called Police Organization Providing Peer Assistance, and it's a volunteer organization. It's a nonprofit, and it's really staffed by former MOS that are retired. It was started back in 1996 and basically created a helpline. So if an MOS has an issue, they can call this helpline, and it's confidential. It's just somebody to talk to. And the helpline is a 24-hour line, and you can call anytime, and it's a way of talking to another cop that's a trained peer support officer. So you go through training. It takes about a year before you really go on the line itself to answer it.
What does the training entail?
The training entails, like, the first thing when you sign up, you go through an interview process to see if you will fit that. They do 3 levels. It's like interviewing for a job. It's not just like you're signing up and you're
Do you get paid for doing it?
No, it's completely volunteer. It's on your own time. And what the training involves is you go away for like a 3-day weekend into like a commune somewhere, and you can't leave. There's no drinking. It's like you're eating together. And
there's no drinking?
Shit, I'm not doing it.
It's like a group of like 30 or 40 peer support officers when they need to.
So this is
fill
real
it.
stuff we're talking
It's real
about right
stuff.
now.
It's the organization has about 280 peer support officers, but people rotate in and out. There's some that have done it for 10, 20 years. Some do it for a couple of years, and because it's a dark side too. You're hearing a lot of dark stuff. So. People's lives change and they move on. So they're always looking for new peer support officers. So what happens is you go away. The initial part is to go away for 3 days. And you sit through training. It's like 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day.
You think they take Mark and I?
Absolutely. They take everybody. They need that comic relief out there. They do a lot of role playing.
You want to volunteer, Mark?
A lot of role playing.
So there's an office somewhere, Papa's office. And
Papa's
in that
office.
office, there's a bunch of phones, and people sit at those phones. And if
No.
no,
So what happens is everything's tied with technology-wise. It used to be beepers. Believe me, when I started, I still have a beeper. We really don't use it anymore, but it was a beeper that you get a beeper, and then you call into the POPPA hotline. That person who calls in would leave a message saying, "Hey, whatever, I'd like to talk to somebody." And then the person who's on that hotline, you're on it from 11 a.m. to 11 a.m. the next day. So you get programmed. If somebody calls the hotline, it gets routed to your cell phone. Hey, you just got a message. Someone called the hotline. So I call in and get the number, and then I would call that person and say, "Hey, I'm Jim. I'm a trained peer support officer. I understand you called up POPPA line." And then you go through a whole litany of things to assure them that it's a non-department. It's supported by the department, but it's not connected to the department. It's totally confidential, and it's a way for someone.
you're just calling up to talk to somebody that's going to understand.
Right, because you're talking to another cop. That's
And
the
there's
idea
no
behind
stigma
it.
attached to it.
Not at all. So that's the beauty
At this
of it.
point, the department doesn't even know, right?
No, the department doesn't know. And that's the point that makes it effective over that period of time. So if I just go back a little bit, so it's a 24-hour hotline. So every day from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., there's another peer support officer that's online, and then there's a backup on call. Because the way it works is somebody can call up and they can talk. And most people call up that do call. It's just like a venting thing. They want to talk about it. But if you identify that there's a real need there, it could be an alcohol issue, it could be a marital problem, it could be a psychological issue that they're talking about. You try to identify it. POPPA has over 120 clinicians in all different fields that are affiliated with us. So if that person wants to get some help, what we do is we set up a meet with them after we talk to them on the phone, and we do a face-to-face in like a public place near.
Are these clinicians volunteers too?
Some are volunteers, but others, like, you can go through their insurance. They'll accept whatever insurance. So now you'll set up an appointment with them. So the idea is you let them vent to you to talk about what their issue is. You try to identify what their main issue is. And if they want to take it to the next level and see somebody, you meet them personally. And then you go through it in a personal meet in a public place, that's neutral. And then you get a little more detail from them. And
Let me ask you something, Jim. As you know, there's been 10 suicides this
Yes.
year of members of the service. Do members of the service know enough about POPPA that is it publicized enough that they know this exists?
Well, it is publicized. I mean, we work in conjunction. We're independent of the department, but the department even promotes and supports us for that very reason. Like, the department has services, psychological services, early intervention. They have a lot of things, but there's that stigma attached to it. If you go through the job, you don't think it's ever.
Well, it's not
gonna
just
be
a
tied.
stigma; it's
Right.
it's reality.
Right.
They do you.
Right. So this organization was established in 1996 because of that, and as a result, it's helped a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's not. In
I
and
know
of
some of
itself.
the people who it's helped. I've seen a lot of the people have gone to POPPA. and it
People,
helped
the
them.
cops are aware of it because I was mentioning to you earlier, I work in the police academy as an actor in the crisis intervention. And a lot of times when I'm doing my scene, the cops who respond, they're from the audience. They pull them out. It's part of a scenario. They tell them it's a job. Might not be what they're, like any other real job. It might not be what they're walking into, and then they have to evaluate it, discover, this person appears to be suffering from some, looks like they might want to commit suicide. And a lot of the times they'll be like, we're going to call, did you call POPPA yet? So a lot of cops are aware of POPPA.
No, it's a great organization that was devised because the department itself didn't really have that way for you to address it inside, and it's such a tragic thing because there's when you go through the training, and if I could just talk about that just real quick, it's like you go away for that 2 or 3 days and you're not locked away, but you're there and you're rooming with somebody.
Let me reiterate, there's no drinking there.
No, there's no drinking. No, yeah. So you
You
go
almost
through.
had me.
You got psychologists. You're learning listening skills because that's the key. It's that you don't want to give advice. It's all about listening. Let people vent and talk about what's bothering them and try to identify what their issue is. So you go through all this training for it. And at the very end of the training it was really a unique thing that they gave out, because you went into a room with everybody that was there at the end of the second or third day, and everyone got into write down something. It was kind of, well, I don't want to say mystical, but it had that feeling. They tried to put you in that chair, or that you're on the other side of that phone, and they had everybody write down on a piece of paper a secret that you never told anybody. Mm-hmm. And put it in a box. And then you shake them up, and everybody pulled the secret out, and you got to read it. And if it was yours, you had to put it back. So you had to read someone else's secret. And the caveat was you could own your secret if you wanted to. And I thought, nobody's going to own, no way you're going to hear it. Mm-hmm. I ain't saying nothing. And a couple were read out, nobody said anything. And all of a sudden, somebody read out. One said, no, that's my secret. And then everybody owned up to that secret, something you never told anybody. And this is confidential. So it served a purpose. Here you are, you're part of this organization.
Mine would have been weird.
You create this.
I don't want to hear Mark's secret.
I don't have that many secrets. All we do is talk about our life. But I did hold on to this girl's shoes once. She asked me to, we used to go out dancing when we were kids, and she had these shoes. And I had a backpack. We were kids. So I put her shoes in my backpack. She must have forgot they were there. They was in my closet for years, man. And I remember, like, every once in a while when I'm digging around, and I had a crush on her. So every once, I never threw those shoes out. As a matter of fact, when I moved out of living with my grandparents, whatever, I had to get rid of those shoes. They might have made one move with me to our next location, but then I grew up. Got my own place. But
you think this
that would have been
you
weird?
Think that
right?
was worthy
to tell that secret
of a POPPA confession.
Right? If I would have said that story, how weird would it have been?
There was no suicidal thoughts.
It's all
with
confidential,
those
so
shoes.
you can't comment on it. It's all confidential. So that was the point. It puts you in that chair. It tests your confidentiality and everybody's empathy, because people got to respond to you and say, hey, I'm sorry that happened to you. And it really gave you that feeling now that, hey, man, when someone calls up, they're telling you something that's really intimate about themselves.
Jim, let me ask you something though. POPPA, great organization, and I mean, hopefully they'll save a lot of lives. I'm sure they have already saved a lot of lives. What is the department doing wrong that is causing 10 suicides a year?
Well, there's psychologists that say they're trying to do something now, because it is such an anomaly. Last year there were 4 suicides, and over the years it's between 4 and 5 that the NYPD has suffered. This year's 10 alone already. It's very alarming. So the job is trying to do something. It's in process now. They're creating a new division. Actually, I think it's the Health and Wellness Division, where they're trying to model it after what LAPD does, and they've been very successful. They've done it for a while. They have peer support officers, sort of like POPPA, strewn throughout the department, hundreds of them, and then they have psychologists that are assigned to different geographic areas in the city that people can go talk to, and literally everybody talks to them. So it kind of avoids that stigma that, hey, if you went and, hey, Jim went to talk to a psychologist, so I ain't working with him. Everybody does.
Well,
so
we had said something about, I think Mark had recommended that everyone mandatorily has to go once or twice a year, everybody, to see like a counselor. It's
such a complex issue, and that's some of the things that LA does. That, yes, that's what's happening. But one of the key things I think, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion. I'm not a spokesman for POPPA or any of these charities, but in my opinion, is why it works so well is because those clinicians are not directly tied to your duty status.
Right.
So if you go to a clinician, they don't have to say, oh man, this guy's got to be removed. They have such a high threshold about removing someone's firearms because they know how impactful that would be to somebody's career. So that doesn't happen unless that person's, they determine they're on that edge where they may be able to go back and they may even say they have some issues that are psychological, but no, they can keep their firearm in their shield and they're getting treatment. They're good to go. So, but they're trained because they are so affiliated with the department that they're out there within the department. So They understand. They do ride-alongs. They show up at, precincts. So these psychologists and LA, unfortunately, just recently had one. But up until this recent suicide, they haven't had a suicide since 2017.
Wow.
So they're
Well, I mean, look at your situation, for example. You were going through a divorce, and at the same time, you were getting the third degree pounded by the job. And meanwhile, you didn't do anything wrong. You were a great supervisor. And just because some lady lost her jewelry, you didn't steal it.
Right.
A lot of times I had a feeling like when you're getting those calls in the squad, like, I didn't commit this crime, bro. Why are you making me feel like I committed the crime? We're doing our best here. I'm trying my best. Well, hopefully we'll catch this person. But in the meantime, it's like, dude, chill out, man.
He did a proper investigation. Totally.
And they found a way. They always find a way to freaking get you. And you talk about the one thing that it happens to say right in the first part of the detective manual,
Right.
squad boss,
Predates,
will be the first thing.
Gotcha.
It says the caveman should start the fire.
In all fairness, it is the first thing that it says there.
Don't carry the club on your shoulder as you
But
enter
still, man, the
cave.
pressure that comes from the job, and everybody talks about it. It's not the pressure from. It's so much not the pressure from what you encounter dealing with perps or dealing with complainants. It's the pressure that comes from the job, even when you're trying to do the right thing. And it seems to me like the ones that the cops that do the right thing, it affects them more, obviously. And they're usually the targets because they're a little bit more active.
Right.
You get these do-nothings, they're never going to get under the spotlight. Like you're a squad boss. You get a detective, an empty suit in your squad, and now you got to constantly answer questions for this guy.
Right.
And you can't let them know that, listen, I'm having trouble reining this guy in because you're supposed to be the boss.
That's my job, yeah.
And that's your job.
Mark, I remember there was a detective that was going, I'd fucking tell them at Comstat. So the squad commander goes, you're coming to the next Comstat. He brought him there. He fucking turned white. He was like, I can't believe the shit you guys have to go through.
I used to sit in at all of them because I used to work for Pulaski. I was in the training unit. I used to coordinate the homicide course and do all the in-service training for the detectives. I did that the last couple of years I was on the job. And part of our thing was we used to have to go to Comstat. And we used to sit in the back. Like, I don't know why we were there, but... and we used to take notes.
It gets nasty sometimes, right?
Oh, It was bad. It was brutal.
With that case from the 19th, I got to read it. There was no discipline that came out of it other being transferred. That I'm assuming that's why it was from that case, but it never came down. And even the official, when I got, the inspections captain that did his final report, it was just something about like my memo book wasn't up to speed, something silly. But there was I never got a CD. I got nothing out of it other than transferred, and they told them to put the hit on the evaluation, which they didn't do.
But it's
Thankfully, I had
also
some good bosses that
obviously
didn't
you're
follow through.
level-headed. A lot of it could come from your background in Taekwondo, or you're driving around in the Bullet, the Steve McQueen's car. But my point is this: my point is that you could handle it. You were tougher than the average person. You know what I'm saying?
He had
because
mental
of your
toughness.
Yeah,
He had mental toughness.
well, obviously he's a squad boss, and that's how he got there. But if you get somebody who's a little bit weaker, man, that kind of stuff, it adds up. And now all of a sudden you're going through a divorce, your family, you're losing your family, plus your other family's on top of your back. They're abusing you. That's what I think the job needs to lay off a little bit with this stuff.
Yeah,
We're not
they
the ones
really-
out there
they
committing the
tortured him,
crimes,
man.
man.
Well, I lucked out when I look back and I went through the POPPA training. One of the things we find out, and even we go through peer support training twice a year, reannual training. So
no alcohol at those
no
either.
alcohol. at
Damn,
those.
man.
And at the end of those, you do these
We're not
self-care
signing up.
meetings.
What kind of racket is this?
Well,
Mark, we're not signing up.
where you meet with the peer support, and it's about self-care. You break it into groups and you talk about, hey, what's going on? What are you doing to take care of yourself? Just those things you have to identify, because self-care is really
what's
important.
funny is that we're talking about this, the drinking thing, but like a lot of cops from like just like before the 80s, the 70s, those guys were big boozers, man.
Yeah.
Do you think, because I know for a fact now the job has half those boozers, maybe less. Do you think that's as an effect because people aren't draining their sorrows and their worries in alcohol anymore, that they're actually trying to deal with this, that they're having a lot of problems?
That's what I was just referring to. If you don't have those self-care outlets, like I was fortunate when I look back and I went through the training. Wow, I had Taekwondo was an outlet. I was always active in sports. I other hobbies, whether it's a fish tank or my bullet or
And you had a good
motorcycle.
family. You had
And
a
I
good
had my
family.
sons. I was
Yeah.
always involved.
You got a
in my-
fish tank too?
Yeah, I do. I keep
How big is it?
The fish
saltwater
tank
reef
saved
aquariums.
them.
Oh, that's a
Saltwater
lot of
reef.
work.
No, not really. If you do
Saltwater?
saltwater, I have reef, crabs, shrimp, fish, coral, but that's the self-care, man. That's what I'm talking about. And if you don't have that, you self-medicate, and that's where it becomes the alcohol becomes a problem, because now you'll talk to people, they'll call up to have an issue, and you have to be very direct. And some of the training we went through is you're never by asking someone, hey, are you going to hurt yourself? You don't want to ask that question. You want to ask outright, have you ever thought about killing yourself? Because you're never going to give someone the idea, oh, I didn't think of that. That never has happened.
Right.
But if you say, hey, you're going to hurt yourself, they're going to, no, I'm going to kill myself. I ain't going to hurt myself. So you may not get the real answer. And then if you drink, people, that develop drinking problems, we have to ask specific questions like, hey, do you drink? What was the last drink you had? Well, I drank last night. Do you drink a lot? No. Well, how much you have? Well, 10 beers. To them, it's not a lot. They drink 10 beers every day.
Right.
They think that's not a lot.
Yeah, but I always go to the World Trade Center physical, and you can't tell them that on the weekend you drink 2 bottles of wine because they're going to sign you up for AA.
Well,
Right.
Right. Well, it's all about that self-care. That's what I said. I was lucky when I went through the training. I went, wow, I had these
a
outlets
lot of the
that
calls,
helped me out.
the initial calls that come through, somebody's intoxicated.
You
can't say, right?
Yeah, that's all confidential stuff. But it's the calls could be anywhere, just some venting about
that
the
was
job.
Interesting. The POPPA thing was interesting, but guess what? You're not done because you also do something else that's great.
Yes.
You also have another place. I don't know. I guess you volunteer there as well. We're not going to mention the name of this foundation, but tell us about the work that you do there.
Well, I got into that when I was in one of the squads, actually. I became a squad commander of one of the Manhattan commands, and since this charity was located in that command, I started spending time there. I'm like, wow, because the precinct did a lot for it. It was a charity that helps families that brought a child to New York City for treatment of rare pediatric cancers. So, I went there, I visited, and I was knocked out how warm it was. So I decided to become a volunteer. And every night there's a different volunteer team that comes in and helps serve dinner to the families. The families are usually in the hospital all day. They come back with the kids at night, and you serve them dinner and do like a nightly activity. So every night there's a different volunteer team. So I did that for like 5 years. On
He's a good guy,
Thursday nights.
No, it's beautiful, man.
And then what the charity would do, they'd ask the volunteers to come help out because there's only about 50, 60 employees. They have these big fundraisers. They have the volunteers to come to their fundraisers and like sign people in and be like the arms and legs of it. And then I realized, I could do this, man. I know guys that own restaurants and bars. I love music. I knew guys that did bands. So I'd go to a restaurant on the west side, a bar, and go, listen, what's a dark day for you? Mondays suck. Okay. Well, on Monday, let's get one of the bands to come back in. We get them to donate their time. We go to your liquor distributor, give them the 501c3 letter, and say, hey, we're going to donate liquor for 150 people. We charge $50, and we raise $10,000. I walk in with $10,000 the next night to the charity. Here you go. I was doing this on and off as a volunteer, and there was a few other things I was doing to help them raise money, and it was like, this is great, And the CEO at the time suggested, hey, well, when you're ready to retire, man, maybe I'll find a spot for you here. So I got to go on a CompStat, and I'm at that podium, right? And I'm talking, and when I'm getting pulled up there, I'd politely say in a nice way, hey, when you're done yelling at me, I wouldn't say that, of course, but when you're done yelling at me, would you mind if I talk about this charity I'm involved with? And they let me. And then from that point, I would say, hey, the combined federal municipal campaigns out there, it's called New York City Gives now. You could donate through payroll deduction to it. If you want to, I'll be outside, give you the forms. So I started getting guys to do that, and over 5 years of doing it, I got over 1,000 people to donate.
See,
to the
that's
charity.
where the job is interesting too, because even though you're getting your ass handed to you at CompStat, when the meeting's over, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
Cops still come up to you. The other bosses will still talk to you. It's just, listen, but it's your turn right now. Somebody's got to get their ass handed to them every week. Today was your turn, so it's not the end of the world.
It got to the point where I was like, looking forward to go to the podium, which was the death sentence. I'm like, wait a minute, that's when it's time to leave. Because I was like, they actually started bringing me down to other CompStats to open it up. So Brooklyn North would be up, and hey, let's hear from Lieutenant Molloy first.
Because you were good at it.
But I talk about giving to charity, and that boroughs loved it because I was burning the clock for 5 minutes.
You're burning the clock, but you're also letting them know that there's more to the job. See, one of the things that I always had a problem with the CompStat was because there wasn't any positive coming out of there. Right. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, if somebody's going to get raked over the coals a little bit, whatever, can we figure out bookend it with maybe some positive stuff? But that's what you did.
Right. And cops are so generous. Once we brought it up and the outpouring, man, guys would give $1, guys would give $25. It was unbelievable, the outpouring. And
So you work for this foundation now? Or
no, I do. Yeah. No, I almost 4.5 years ago I retired because like I said, I'm going to the podium, wanting to go there, and I knew it was time to go. And I didn't leave disgruntled. Like I said, I worked 5 years after that other thing.
But you're working for this place, right? It's not volunteering.
I was, yeah. No, I went. They created a spot for me, and now I'm working there, helping them raise money.
Right?
I'm
so
a
you
fundraiser.
figured out. All right, good. You finally know how to make money now.
Sure. From the 7th squad, I went to the 9th, and that's a kind of a funny story because the CEO at the time was this guy Pete Venice, great guy. I got along great with him, and Pete was, the 9th opened up, and that's a promotion command. You go to the 9th from a DI, you can make inspector out of it. From the 7th as a DI, you can make inspector out of the 9th. So I got along great with him. I remember him coming up to the squad and he goes, hey, Jim, man, at this time, I got like 23 years on. And he's like, hey, Jim, I'm going to the 9th, man. Would you like to come be my squad commander? And I'm like, nah, Pete, man. I'm super comfortable here, man. I know all the guys. It's working well. I got 23. I'm going through. And he's like, all right, man, no problem.
Still didn't get the hint. He's not asking.
He was
He's telling you, you're coming with me.
The next day, I get called down to the Manhattan Detective Chief's office. As Chief Aubrey, good guy, and he's really good friends with Pete Venice. So I'm sitting in his office, and he goes, "You see that picture over there? That's me and Pete Venice." That's me and Pete Venice over in that picture. That's me and Pete Venice. He goes, you got to do me a favor, Jim. You got to come to the 9th and work for Pete Venice. I said, whatever you need, Chief. And then I'm in the 9th precinct.
See, I just said that. They're not asking you. It's like being polite, but it's like, hey, listen, you're going to come and work with us.
It was fine.
Wasn't bad though, right?
No, it was good.
It's like you were a made man.
Hey, I was on this side of the, the Mason-Dixon line. Now I'm
Donnie
like pushing
Brasco.
everything back down to the 7th.
Remember the scene on the back of the boat? When he's like telling him because you're going to work for... No, you don't understand. You're working for me now. Forget about Lefty.
Right,
You work under me, directly under me.
No, it's great. But Pete Venice is a great guy, excellent commander, precinct commander, and I'm not even sure where he is at this point. I've lost contact with him since I've been out almost 5 years. But yeah, it was good. It was good working tonight. It was just starting all over again. You don't want,
No, you never
don't
want to
start
start
all over
over
again.
Yeah, because you finally get comfortable in the place. You figure everything out. It's all working nice in the system. And then it's like owning a company in a way. You built up this company, and now you got to break it. They got to go start again somewhere else.
And when I told the chief, I decided I was going to retire. I went in. I actually talked to the borough commander first, and then I went down to the chief of detectives. But Chief Aubrey was like, "Hey, you sure you want to go? The Midtown South's opening up. I could use you there." I was like,
God.
I don't want to start over in another big political squad. No. My decision was
Who was the
made.
chief of detectives when you retired?
Boyce.
Oh, Boyce. Okay.
Yeah, and he had left Manhattan Detectives before Aubrey, so he was familiar with me because I worked for him. He came from the Bronx to Manhattan, and then
Cream always rises to the top on the job, man. Doesn't takes.
But he had a rough go of it, man.
He caught his little spanking for no reason at all. Everybody gets it.
it.
You know what it's like? It's almost like a beat in. Can you take the beating before you get in? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Everybody's got to get it, and then you become one of the boys. Look, you step in front of everybody. Look at him.
But it's a shame when you get a beating when you didn't do anything wrong.
The only time
That's
it
the hard
happens to
thing.
you is if you're going to step up and you're going to try to make something out of yourself.
Yeah.
They got to prove, okay, this guy can take it.
it all worked out. Like I said, I didn't run. Like I said, I've seen a lot of squad commanders at the time that, they get through that and they get transferred and then they cut their overtime and they're like, I'm leaving. And then they end up coming back a year later because they don't have a plan. They leave the job, go work somewhere, and then they realize, holy cow, man, I kind of.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but the admirable thing to do is you leave on your
own terms. Yeah.
And it led me to this charity, and they're doing great work. And then, to be honest with you, this charity led me back to POPPA. I knew all about POPPA. But I didn't get involved with it. And then I had a volunteer buddy of mine, not to be too dark, but he was a firefighter and he was a prolific volunteer at this organization, and he ended up taking his own life. And I was like, wow, man, I was around this guy every Thursday, and like, he had a relationship that ended, and it turns out he had a 9/11 illness. He had a lot of stuff going on in his life, and he ended up taking his life. And I was like, wow, I can't, how did I see that? And then I went through this training, and I was like, wow, that's
Jim, that's the thing that people always harp on or get upset about when they go to the cops and they said, did you notice he had a problem? And the cops say, yeah. Then why the fuck didn't you say something? You know what I mean? Like, there's that stigma of being a rat. No, you're not ratting on someone that may commit suicide.
Right.
He needs help. Yeah.
I don't know. It's like...
There's an equation.
No, doesn't that always happen?
No,
they go and they say the cops
But some
like,
people
he
can
had a
handle
problem.
more than other people. So a lot of people are more sensitive than others. And then, I don't know. Who knows, man? I've been around people that committed suicide, and I didn't know.
I'm not a psychologist.
It's a surprise.
I'm not a psychologist, obviously, with that. But I go through the peer support training, and you talk to psychologists, and they give out an equation. Equation is chronic pain for suicide. Chronic pain, it could be emotional or physical, combined with hopelessness. That chronic pain's never going to get better, and then the triggering factor is that person sustains some sort of loss. At that time, that's when they think there's no other option. So this is going to make it end. Chronic pain. Could be you broke your relationship. You could be sick. Mm-hmm. It's not getting better. That hopelessness that it's never getting better. And then you just suffered a loss. You could have lost your job. You could have lost a family member. You could have lost a relationship. And then that triggers it. Like, that's the way out.
Yeah.
And that's the elusive thing. And to summarize it, that's what they say in the training. How do you identify that? It's really hard to do. It's not, depression. Hey, the Yankees lost. I'm depressed. Everybody gets depressed from time to time, but it's that tragic combination. And with police officers, when you talk to somebody, they have that lethality ready. So if that thought happens, it's on their hip.
Right. Because you do that type of work, and now it's become almost second nature. Listening to people, do you get a lot of like friends and stuff like that are calling you up and like, this fucking guy again? Before you come to the phone,
I called him. I said, Jim, you didn't pay your bar bill. Nice.
Yeah, because once people, you have to have a good ear,
right?
That's a great thing, man.
Well, the job is trying to do something, because after the 9th suicide, actually in September, they created that health and wellness unit with the idea is to model it after LA. It's unfunded yet. They apply, they put it to the city council. It's a bill pending that they want to fund it. And the idea would be to create its own peer support network of cops, like 300 to 600 cops throughout the city. And then they create these zones of, I have like 58 psychologists with 2 social workers and a cop assigned that are going to every precinct and they're talking. So everybody, so it kind of,
They should take one person out of every freaking inspection unit and make them work a volunteer there. And they rotate, at least one. So this way they can see what they're dealing, what they're selling.
But the sad part is it's part of the problem is the job. So to be part of the solution is hard. At the end of the day, when it's implemented, it's going to be crucial to see if, like in LA, are they tied to the duty status? Because guys are not going to want to come forward still.
I think
if
they're
they
going to have to move away with that. My recommendation was that everybody should be assigned a therapist or a clinician as soon as they get on the job. The way that you're assigned a district surgeon. So there's no stigma, and you have to go there when you go to the range. On the way back, half the day should be the range, and the other half of the day should be going to find your clinician wherever they are. And then once you're there, if you want to talk to them a little bit more, you could set up another appointment privately. If you only want to see them the once a year, but people go, what are you doing tomorrow? I got to go see the shrink. It will be like a normal thing because everybody's got to do it.
Exactly.
That was my suggestion. I know it would be costly.
It's a great idea.
I think it would be costly, but listen. If it's going to save lives, and and you could also have the volunteers like what you were doing, what you were mentioning, those groups, those support groups, also working to always have people who are volunteering. That volunteering thing is a really special thing that you do, and it takes a strong person to do that, man. I've always I've been I wanted to get involved in some type of volunteering, and I'm hoping that I get the time to do that sometime soon, but I know that's got to be an incredible feeling, right?
No, it is. It's especially you're on that peer line, and like I said, it's personal to me from this aspect of I've been involved with the job for so long, but it was really only my last 2 years that I got involved with POPPA, and I always knew the organization was there, and then once you got involved, you create a real kinship with the group you go through that initial training with, so you're on the line, and then you're broken into teams. So every team has a week block. So 2 people are on each day. That rotates around probably about every 5 weeks. There's enough of us. So you're only doing it once every 5 weeks. So it doesn't take a lot of your time. But, some days you won't get any calls. Some days you could get 5, 6 calls. It all depends. It all varies on what goes on.
How about what kind of effect does fielding those calls have on you?
Well, that's the important part of going back for that semi-annual training because it's self-care. You gotta be aware. Like, listen, if you take a dark call and you're like, wow, that's you're sitting across from someone that's telling you some really intimate things, really dark, and you're like, okay, let's get you you want some help?
Yeah, that's not easy either, man.
No.
So it takes its toll. So you have to have that self-care. You have to have, I'm going to go take care of myself today. What am I going to do? I'm going to go, take a ride on my bike, or I'm going to work on my fish tank, or do taekwondo, or someone to talk to, or you go to the peer support group, and then we break off at the end and go, hey, what are you doing? What's going on with you? And you get to tell, hey, this is what's going on. And you get to vent it out.
God bless
and you
you.
lean on each other.
God bless you. It's tough, man. It's tough because I'm like a happy-go-lucky guy. You know what I'm saying? I like to laugh and joke around all freaking day. And then whenever I come across somebody, and I describe it a lot of times, it's like energy-wise. They're always, everything they talk about is bringing you down. And I'm not talking about depressive stuff, but it's just, I'm like, I got to stay away from this person. And then there's a lot of stuff that you read online about cutting yourself off. What are you really cutting yourself off from? Are you containing yourself so you're always around these happy people, joyous people, that nothing superficial is happening? Or do you have really real conversations with people? That's what it's about. Some people drain you, though. There are people who drain you.
That's
they
for
really
sure,
are.
man.
They got nut.
Well, you stay away from negative influences a lot of time, right?
This guy's diving right in. This guy goes in head first.
Yeah.
He's there to help. God bless you, man. Like I always tell people, a lot of people get on the job because they want to help people. I wasn't one of them. I wanted to get that parking plaque. You know what I'm saying?
That's great.
Where are we with time, Andrew? We're about there. Wow. So what did we learn, man? Each one of these episodes are they're so interesting and fascinating because we're meeting people that are not only were they great cops, but they also doing stuff outside of the job after retirement, and what you're doing is just remarkable, man.
Well, thank you.
And anybody who's out there who's on the job, a member of the service, whether you're on NYPD or not, would you mind giving out your home number? If you have a problem, any magnitude at all.
Is this Molloy from POPPA? Could I borrow your car?
And while we're
I
at
like
it,
that car.
could I get the jacket too? I got a hot date. Do you let your kids use the car? How old are your kids?
I have an 18-year-old. Yeah, I've let him drive.
driving?
Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's great. You're a great dad.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That's great. But you sitting next to him, or you just?
Well, when I've offered it to him, he's like, "Ooh," but he's driven it with me in it. Yeah, he felt comfortable that way.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
That's cool.
And it's I would imagine. What does it have? The flippers for the gears?
No, it's got the it's a 6-speed. Yeah.
Oh, it's a it's
a
a
standard
manual.
Oh yeah, manual
Really?
transmission. Yeah,
Ah,
absolutely.
God bless you, man.
Yeah,
I didn't think they
absolutely.
made those anymore.
Yeah, well, for this one they did. Yeah.
Oh man,
Wow.
that's awesome, man. Can you leave a hole shot for us before when you leave? That would be great. I'd love to see that. Do you do any racing with it?
No, I haven't. But it can. It has that ability to like split rocking, go up, and you can drive it around.
Does it have a launch on it?
No.
No launch on it?
No.
Because I got into watching a lot of these shows on TV or watching just drag races. I'm fascinated. I don't know shit about cars, but I love watching drag racing. And a lot of these cars have the launch on it now. You just set it up, whatever configure. I don't know how to use it, but you just press the launch and it kind of sort of takes off for you. You can mess it up, though.
Right, I'm sure.
A lot of people blame the launch after they lose. But well, Bill, this has been an incredible episode. My heart feels good after this episode.
I just want to say a couple of things. I worked with Jim when he first came to the 2-4. He was in my anti-crime team. Great cop, and unfortunately, all the great cops I had outranked me near the end of my career. They all made lieutenant. One of them, Dennis DeQuattro, made chief. So I had all these great cops that worked with me, but he was true to himself, and he stood up. When other people would have crumbled, and I admired that about him.
Well, thanks,
and
Billy.
you see on this job, even we mentioned D.I. Connell. She stood up to the powers that be, and they tortured the shit out of her too. You know what I mean?
Admirable people.
So that's
No, they
what
did.
some of the
I
best.
survived that because I had a lot of support from those guys.
Right,
A
but
lot of honorable people on the job.
They're total. That was one of my points. Is that you see, this is our 39th episode. The cops we've had on here have been incredible people. Not just incredible cops, but incredible people.
That's why the podcast works.
Yeah.
The people that we were introducing to our audience are just phenomenal people. And this one's like right at the top. It just takes the cake. The amount of hours that you did volunteering, even when you were going through your own stuff, volunteering, and the fact that you're working with the other people now and you're doing wonderful things there, man. It's just extraordinary, man. You got to feel really, really good. That's why you don't need to drink and all this stuff, because you feel good.
But he still does drink heavily.
I doubt it. No, not like that, man. Not when he's involved with the martial arts. There's a discipline there.
Look, there's a time for everything.
That's right.
You know,
Moderation.
yeah,
And everything in
moderation.
moderation.
Everything in moderation.
Absolutely.
You know.
Tonight I'm going to get moderated. Well, on behalf
Always
of
the comedian.
on behalf of Police Off the Cuff, man, thanks
Well,
for coming
thanks for
through,
having me.
James.
Appreciate
we
it.
got to take a picture. We didn't take.
Yeah, we got to take a picture.
You know.
Always
Thanks
gotta
for having me.
remember.
This was great.
Thanks,
It was
Bill. Any
excellent.
parting words?
Nah, I said, every time we do this show, I'm just over the moon, man.
Yeah, I'm honored, man. Thanks again. Like I mentioned at the top of the first part of this podcast, how overwhelmed, how thrilled I am with the positive feedback and the kind words that we get. Keep them coming, man. It makes me feel better. So I don't have to call Papa. All right, peace out.
Peace.